The prairie stretched wide under a pale autumn sky, the wind carrying the scent of dust and dry hay. In a small auction barn on the outskirts of Wyoming, a crowd shuffled on wooden benches, waiting for the next round of horses to be driven in. Most people came here to bargain by stock cheap, turn it for profit. Few cared for what condition the animals were in. Among them sat Clara Whitmore, her dark hair tucked under a weather-beaten hat, her hands rough from years of ranch work. She wasn't wealthy. In fact, she was barely keeping her modest spread afloat. But Clara had a heart that couldn't turn away from suffering, and that was what had brought her here. Earlier that week, she had caught wind of an estate sale. Earl Weatherfield, an old rancher with a respected line of registered paint horses, had died suddenly. Clara knew Earl by reputation, a man who loved his horses, who would never have let them starve. But since his passing, the property had fallen into the hands of his only heir, a nephew named Martin Weatherfield, who had no use for livestock and every intention of selling the ranch and its contents as quickly as possible. When Clara first heard of the auction, she had a gnawing feeling. The notice listed only a handful of horses, odd given Earl's reputation for keeping a prized herd. Something about it didn't sit right with her, so she drove the 2 hours into town, her entire savings of $3,000 folded neatly into her pocket. The auctioneer's voice carried across the barn, sharp and detached. Lot number 15, 3 horses sold as a group. The gate swung open, and Clara's heart nearly broke. A skeletal stallion stumbled forward, his once brilliant chestnut coat dulled and patchy. Behind him followed a mare, ribs jutting sharply, her eyes glassy with exhaustion. Last came a weanling foal, his legs too thin to support him properly, every step trembling. Their heads hung low, manes tangled with burrs, lips cracked from thirst. Clara swallowed hard. Ow. These weren't just neglected, they were dying. Lot includes registered stallion, Crimson Valor, mare Prairie Lullaby, and colt Chance's Echo. The auctioneer droned. Duh! A murmur spread through the crowd. Even in this state, those names meant something. Earl Weatherfield's line was legendary among paint horse breeders. But Clara noticed the men bidding weren't interested in lineage. Their eyes were cold, calculating. She had seen men like that before, dealers who bought cheap horses for slaughter trucks headed across the border. Bidding started low. 500, one man called. 700, another added. Clara's chest tightened. She knew what awaited those horses if she didn't act. She shot her hand into the air. Ow. Heads turned. A few chuckled at the sight of the wiry young woman raising her voice against the burly cattleman. 1,002 came another bid. Clara didn't hesitate. 1,500. The men shifted, irritated. They weren't used to being challenged. 2,000. 2,500. Her heart raced. That was nearly everything she had, the auctioneer barked out, waiting for a counter. The men exchanged glances. Finally, one spat into the dirt and sat back. They weren't willing to outspend her. Sold for $2,500 to the lady in the second row. The gavel struck. Clara sagged with relief, though the weight of her emptied savings pressed heavy on her chest. She had just risked everything. But when she stepped forward and laid a gentle hand on the mare's neck, felt a trembling warmth beneath her skin. She knew she had done the only thing her conscience would allow. "I'll take them all," Clara whispered as if to herself. That night, she called Dr. Eleanor Briggs, a veterinarian she trusted with her life. Eleanor arrived with her truck loaded down with supplies for fluids, vitamins, hay cubes soaked in water. Together they worked long into the night. Clara held the stallion steady as Eleanor inserted the catheter. She spoon-fed the full handfuls of mash, whispering encouragement with every bite he managed to swallow. The mare, Prairie Lullaby, barely had strength to stand. Clara pressed her forehead against the animal's neck, promising she wouldn't let her fall. For days, Clara hardly slept. Every 2 hours she rose to feed the horses in small amounts, careful not to overwhelm their fragile stomachs. She rubbed their legs to keep circulation flowing, brushed their coats clean of dirt and burrs. Slowly, incredibly, they began to improve. Within a week, Crimson Valor lifted his head higher. Prairie Lullaby's eyes brightened. Chance's Echo, once too weak to walk, began trotting circles in the paddock. Clara wept the first time she saw him buck playfully. Not long after, Martin Weatherfield arrived at her ranch. He pulled up in a shiny truck, his expression one of irritation more than concern. "I heard you bought my uncle's horses," he said flatly. "I'll give you double what you paid. They're worth more than I realized." Clara crossed her arms. "They're not for sale," Martin scoffed. "Everything's for sale." "Not them," Clara said firmly. "They're lives, not commodities. You left them to starve. You don't get to profit from them now." Her voice left no room for argument. Martin hesitated, then turned back to his truck, muttering under his breath. Clara didn't care. She had made her choice. 3 months later, the transformation was astonishing. The horses gleamed with health, their coats thick and glossy, their bodies strong again. Crimson Valor pranced with the pride of a champion. Prairie Lullaby, once frail and fading, carried herself with quiet dignity. Chance's Echo followed at Clara's heels like a shadow, curious and full of life. One afternoon, Clara received a letter from the American Paint Horse Association. It confirmed what she already suspected: the bloodlines of these 3 horses were rare, among the most sought after in the country. Breeders were already offering staggering sums for them. But Clara shook her head. She hadn't saved them to sell them. Their value was not in dollar signs, but in what they meant to her: a promise kept, a legacy preserved.